The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to John. Glory to you, Lord Christ. Jesus said, "Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They do not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers." Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Good morning. This morning we're going to do something a little different. We've done it before, and that is to have a conversation among ourselves and with you for our sermon. So you might be seated, and we'll get started as soon as we have all the props in line, all the chairs. All right, well, this is Good Shepherd Sunday, as many call it, even though we don't get the story where Jesus says, "I am the Good Shepherd." We do get lots of words about being a shepherd. And the way this is going to work is that the three of us, myself, Brad, and Chris, will say a few words about the gospel, each of us, and then we'll open it up to you for questions, comments, wonderings, whatever comes to mind for you. So, Brad, do you want to get us started?
Thank you. We did this at 8 o'clock as well this morning, and didn't get a lot of responses or participants. So we're hoping for more. Mm-hmm. So as you hear us speak, if you have any questions or comments or would like to say anything, we encourage you to do that, please. This is from the Gospel of John today, and two things that I always remember when I read the Gospel of John is first that, according to scholars, it is the last of the Gospels to have been written, the most recent, relatively speaking, in that sense. They think, many of them, most of them think that it probably was written at least 100 years after the time of the Gospel of Mark, which would have been the first gospel to have been written. So 100 years, that's a long time. Think of it from our own framework. 100 years ago was 1926. So I don't know that there's anybody here who was alive in 1926, but you might remember from those who were and from history what life was like back then. It was very different from what it's like today. We live in a world today that's changing so rapidly. It's like it's a different world almost from week to week. It's difficult to keep up with it. But so that's the reality that we have here. John is a later gospel. It's written to a world that's a little different than the world that Jesus and the disciples lived in. So we have to keep that in mind. The other thing is that John is full of symbolism. Very symbolic. There's virtually nothing that Jesus teaches or things that happen within the narrative of John's gospel that can be taken in more ways than one. There's more ways than one to interpret what is said or what happens in John's gospel. So it's very flexible in that sense. It's not stuck in the first century of Palestine. It can be very real to us as we live our lives today in the 21st century in White Bear Lake. So those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you, Brad. It's always good to hear some historical context for scriptures, especially John. I'll go next.
Sure. So as I was reflecting on this passage, I was particularly struck by the language of the sheep recognizing the voice of their shepherd. Now, as far as I'm aware, sheep don't speak Aramaic or English. They recognize some commands, but they don't speak the language we speak. So when they recognize the voice of their shepherd, they recognize the tone, the pitch, the timbre, the way the voice makes them feel safe, loved, drawn in. They know this is the one whom they are to follow. As I was thinking about it, I was thinking about today. Not this day, but our lives now. And we are being told so many ways and in so many places who Jesus is and what Jesus wants from us. But the question I have for all this morning, the question I asked myself, is how do we recognize Jesus' voice? One of the things that drew me to the Episcopal Church not too long ago was that I wanted to follow Jesus in a way that I recognized as the voice of Jesus. Maybe some of you have been told that to follow Jesus means you have to believe certain things or act in a certain way or think certain things about other groups of people. That's certainly what I was told. But I knew that wasn't the voice of the shepherd, whom I loved and loved in return, and who gave himself up for all of us, who stood for justice and who loved the poor and the oppressed, and those whom the world saw as worthless. So the reflection I have, and something that maybe we can all think about together this morning, is how do we recognize that voice that welcomes us in? I know for me, when I hear people use and invoke the name of Christ, for me it's less about what they're saying, although that certainly has a part of it. Maybe they can even have passages to back it up. But the question I have is that the voice of the one who loves us and gave himself up for us? Is that the voice of Jesus? And is that the one whom we will follow?
Thank you, Chris. You know, you won't be surprised at this, but I'd like to put the passage in context. I do that a lot. Knowing what comes before is often helpful in understanding. And so this passage in John is it's the third of a three-part passage. The first part of it is the healing of the man born blind in the temple. And as you may recall, that's a very long gospel because it's not only the healing, but it's the religious authorities trying to figure out what happened and who was responsible. And what happens is the man born blind eventually gets kicked out of the community because he's not respecting the elders that much. And then he finds Jesus. And Jesus invites him to follow him. So that context is what we're hearing when Jesus is talking today about shepherds and sheep. That was a very big theme in the Old Testament. You see a lot about shepherds and sheep. And so Jesus was speaking to not just his disciples, but to the authorities who were around as well. So we want to keep that in mind as we listen to what he says. Brian, you're going to take your, there you go. Questions, comments, wonderings? Brian has a microphone and he'll come along. Yes, Anne, thank you.
So my question isn't so much specifically related to this gospel, but something I've been wondering about when, particularly when Brad said 100 years later. So were these stories of Jesus just passed down by word of mouth from one apostle to the next? And how do we know that these are accurately described and accurately put to Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
When, as you say, 100 years is a long time. We can't even play a child's game of telephone in 2 minutes and have it come out right at the end. How do they do it?
That's a wonderful question. Anybody want to take a stab at it? I can if you don't want to.
I'll do my best. It may have been more than 100 years. 100 years is just an estimate. It might have been 200 years, for all we really know. The stories of Jesus really did start out with an oral tradition. They weren't written down until decades after his time, at the earliest, decades after his time. There are a few books of the New Testament that scholars think are actually older than the Gospels. Some of the letters attributed to Paul are estimated to be older than the Gospels. So they were in circulation and being read before the Gospels were written and circulated and read. There weren't any people following Jesus around with notepads or anything like that. There certainly weren't any iPhones where they were making videos or recordings or anything. So we don't know. I mean, to answer your question very quickly and bluntly, we don't know how factual these are. We rely on the witness of faith that comes from the people who spread these stories by oral tradition, carried them on from generation to generation, and eventually wrote them down, which was essentially the common way of doing things back then. There really wasn't any other way of doing it at that time. So even though it seems strange to us, when you go back to those days, that's how they did it. I think that it's amazing that for something that was written so long ago, we can still find relevance today. And we do from the Gospels. And that's the gift of the Gospels, is that everything in them can be applied to our lives as we live them today. And that's what keeps these stories alive. These stories are alive. They're not just fixed in the first century Palestine. They're just as relevant today to us in the 21st century might relate. That's my, I don't know if that answers your question sufficiently, but that's the best I can do.
I knew the word faith was going to come in there.
Okay.
You want to step in that one? Or?
No, I think you answered really well. I just would add briefly that you're right. There is no way to technically fact check these texts. But part of what it means to be part of a worshiping community is to be in continuity with the church that has preceded us. And these early Gospels in John is part of the tradition of the church that's developing. So whatever was passed down, we are still participating in that tradition. And so in a way the question isn't, is this accurate? It's what is the church teaching and believing and preaching about this Jesus, even 100 years later from where Jesus lived.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Chris.
I too was struck by the sheep are hearing the master's voice. And so, again, everyone has their own culture and their own country, and they each are thinking of their hearing their master's voice. And even we here in the U.S. have so many different cultures and religions and so forth, and we're each thinking we're hearing the master's voice. And so how it is to blend it all in?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Pat. And I would like to say that the point of knowing whose voice you're listening to is the process of discernment. It's the process of sifting through what is actually of God and what isn't, what's another voice. And so we do that partly by listening to the community. We do that by studying. We do that by judging by the fruits of things. That's what Paul says, is judge them by their fruits. And so I know if there's good fruit coming, it's probably God's voice speaking. Much more so than if it were not good fruit coming. Yeah. That's one way to deal with that. It can be very confusing though. Yeah. You want to say anything about that?
No, the simple one, briefly, the simple test I always ask is, does this cause me to love my neighbor more or less? And even that, there's some ambiguity, but the question is, does it increase love or make it decrease, or increase division and increase hatred?
That's the basic discernment question. Yes. Okay. Dick.
Yeah, well, just looking at the first paragraph, not the second paragraph here, because that kind of changes the tone a little bit. I could see certain factions in our country, and maybe all countries, that look at that and say, this is anti-immigrant. Because of the gate. Those that are, let's put it this way, anti-illegal immigrant because of the gate. That, the government is trying to say you've got to come through the gate, and all those that have not come through that gate are illegal and need to be sent back. And we know that with the surge that's been going on here in Minnesota and of course elsewhere. And so, it's interesting how in this particular case, as well as many others that we're hearing in the news, people are using certain religious phrases to put their point. And so, you have to know the whole story instead of just taking a piece. And somebody will take this first paragraph and use it in a way that I would say is not Christian, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
anyway.
Thank you. That's a good comment. And you want to say something, Brett?
Thank you for that, Dick. In keeping with the symbolism of the Gospel of John, as we indicated, and then looking at the language that John was originally written in Greek, first century Greek, let's take a look at that word gate. And this gate is a loaded term in this day and age in this country. Now, in the original Greek that this passage was written, the word that is used as translated into English as gate, most commonly understood that way, in the original Greek can also be understood as or translated as opportunity. Not just gate or door, but opportunity is sometimes how that word was understood. So even though it's not translated like that in our scripture as we have it before us, let's just assume that the translation is opportunity, and that's what we're looking at. Jesus says, I am the opportunity. What that means is that we're given a chance with Jesus. Jesus is giving us a chance, taking a chance on us in our lives and how we can live. This is our opportunity to see life differently and live in a different way. And Jesus shows us that way, how to do it. And how he does it is through his teachings and his actions throughout his ministry as they're recorded in the Gospels, which can really be summarized in just a handful of them. Love, whatever increases love, promotes love. Forgiveness, not grudge holding, but forgiveness. Welcoming to the stranger and to the outcast instead of despising them and trying to keep them out or drive them out. What Jesus did throughout his ministry was just the opposite. Jesus went out of his way to embrace those who were rejected and seen as worthless and dangerous. And why did Jesus do that? I think because he recognized that these two are children of God who are worthy of the respect and the honor that anyone else is. And he knew that that wasn't happening in his culture at the time, so he felt that he had to go out of his way to demonstrate that, because that was important to him to do. And healing is another part of it. What can we do to provide healing in the world and in our lives and the lives of our loved ones? So whenever we see these things happening in our lives and in the world, that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity for us to act according to how Jesus would.
Thank you, Brad. Other questions? Comments? Wondering? Yes, Larry.
Pat's comment kind of reminded me of a different story, nothing from John, but actually from Acts, when the apostles were speaking to the crowds, and the Holy Spirit came down and gave them the ability to speak all these different languages, and everybody was understanding them in all the different languages. And it's a completely different way, but in that way, they understood the voice. And this is a similar but different way of understanding the voice of the Master.
Right, thank you. It's a good observation. Anything else? Okay.
I'm always struck by the I am statements of Jesus, that this is, I am the gate, or I am the opportunity. And it's always our opportunity to choose him, and instead of our own way. And that is the hardest and the best thing in the world.
Thank you, Sylvia. Yes, that I am statement is interesting for other reasons as well. The Greek of the I am statements is the same phrase that God uses with Moses at the burning bush, when Moses says, what am I to tell them? Who sent me? And God says, I am. Or I am who I will be, or I am who I have been. I am. And Jesus uses those I am statements several times in John's Gospel. As Brad was saying, he's symbolic. He also repeats motifs. And so it would be interesting to go through John sometime and pick out all the I am statements and see what they say. I am the good shepherd is one of them. I am the gate. I'm the bread of life. All kinds of things. Okay. Why don't we take a moment to regroup here and take some time to think about the questions that have been asked. And we will move on with our liturgy.